Factoring by grouping is a method that you really only use if you're trying to factor an expression that has 4 terms. So it's pretty easy to remember when you might actually use it. So here's an example where I have 4 terms. So the idea with factoring by grouping is there's kind of 3 main steps. The first main step is that you're going to do the grouping part. You're going to group the first 2 terms together and then the last 2 terms together, and you do so using parentheses, and you leave an operation in the middle, meaning addition or subtraction. So if I group the first 2 terms with parentheses and the last 2, I just make sure there's a subtraction or addition left in the middle. It is a bit tricky when there's subtraction left in the middle, so just make sure that you watch the last example of this video to see that type of example. So that's a very easy first step. Second step, factor out the greatest common factor out of each group. So let me get back on, let me grab this really fast. Oops, I lost a parentheses. So if I factor out the greatest common factor out of the first group, I notice out of x cubed and 7x squared, the common factor, or the greatest common factor, is x squared. So I'm going to factor that out. Okay, if I factor that out, I imagine if I were to multiply that back through, I need to get back to x cubed plus 7x squared. So x squared times x gives me x cubed, and then x squared times 7 makes us 7x squared. Now doing the same thing for the second group, there's a 3 in common, and that is the greatest common factor. If you factor that out, 3 times x would get you back to 3x, and then 3 times 7 would get me back to 21. The next step, so that is just the second step. The last step is that you factor out the common binomial factor, if there is one. Here, there is one, and what we mean by that, if you look at the first group or first term and the second term or second group, there's a common binomial of x plus 7, which can be factored out of both of those terms. So let me rewrite what we have here. So I'm saying I've got a term here and a term here. They share something in common, a common binomial. They both have a factor of x plus 7. If you factor that out, if I were to factor that and imagine multiplying x plus 7, the factor back through, x plus 7 times what gets me back to x squared times x plus 7. You need the x squared. And then plus x plus 7 times what gets me back to 3 times x plus 7. I need the 3. So you don't, that looks a little goofy with the brackets. You really would just answer x plus 7 times x squared plus 3. And that's actually the answer. And don't forget, you can always check. So if you were to check, all you have to do is multiply this out. So that's the answer, but to check it, I'd say, okay, if I multiply this out, I get x cubed plus 3x plus 7x squared plus 21. And you'd have to go back to the beginning if you, I'm not going to scroll up, but that is the original expression. Remember, the order the terms are written in doesn't matter. So we got it right.